So we're still on the Equality and Diversity Unit 13, and we're going to be looking at Learning Outcome 2. Now, the learning outcome is understand the importance of promoting equality and valuing diversity and lifelong learning. And then it's got 3 assessment criteria. So 2.1 is reflect on how the promotion of equality and diversity can protect learners from risk of harm. 2.2 is explain actions that can be taken to value individual learners, and 2.3 is explain good practice in providing individual learners with information. So when we come on to it, we're looking at how we're going to promote equality and diversity. So we're going to, promote the learner from any type of harm. So how can we actually use this to promote learning from any type of harm? So in a basic way, whatever we are, whatever positions we're working in, we know that we need to follow our settings, our policies, procedures at the establishment that we're working at. So if it's a training centre, if you're working as a tutor, a lecturer, an assessor, if you're there to do a couple of hours or full-time, it's regardless of what you're doing. If you're in an educational establishment, any type of establishment that is offering training, you're going to have policies and procedures in place. So you're going to, it really helps you to create a nice conductive. I've just realised I've got a spelling mistake. Please ignore that. I'll change it later. So have a conductive learning environment or a working environment. So this actually helps learners to feel safe and secure, helps them to feel that they're heard and that they're valued. So when you're looking at these, you need to actually make sure that you know exactly what steps to follow if there's any concerns. So you'll be familiar with your safeguarding policies, with the equality and diversity. If you're within a school setting or anything, you might be familiar with the Prevent Education Act. Have you heard of the Prevent Act?
No.
Right, so the Prevent...
My only understanding is of prevent. Oh no, it's not the same one. I don't think. The prevent policy I know is around. No, sorry, it's different policy. Sorry, go on, please. Do you want to explain it? And I'll tell you if it's the same one.
It's against radicalisation. It's to make sure. Yeah, that's the one. It is now. It's become quite important. I mean, about 10 years ago, I wouldn't have even thought of this, but within these last 2 years, I've actually done 2 different training sessions on them. Now, all it is that it's teaching tutors, teachers, assessors, anybody that's in touch with a learner, just to keep an eye out for any type of concerning views, or like when if you're in a high school and a student comes in and they're spouting off, saying a few things that might be concerning, it's just to go and identify it and have a conversation if you're comfortable. If not, then who do you go to? Who do you speak to? So that is what the actual Prevent Act follows.
Yeah, that was my understanding. I wasn't sure that it fitted in here, but that was my understanding. I actually went on the launch of the Prevent Act in Manchester with the police and with education a few years ago. Well, it would have been 2015 now. But yeah, we did that as part of, although we weren't fully in education, we were nursing at the time. We were asked to be involved in that as well.
But it's still important even then, because you're coming in contact with a lot of vulnerable people as well. And you do hear things, and you do. So it's not there for you to police someone, but it's there just for you to have an awareness so that you can, if there's a concern, especially if there's a very big change in attitude for somebody that you're familiar with, then it really does help you. So
so we incorporate it in our session as well, because you have to put when you're doing observation reports and you're dealing with student learners,
Especially when you've got certain topics, like when I teach equality and diversity, especially the amount of differences in views that I have seen and read. So even when you're assessing it, it's extremely important, because that is where you can sort of pinpoint and say, these views sound a little bit different from what you are normally doing. So yeah. So along with that, you've got the Human Rights Act, your Equality Act, and I think I said the safeguarding as well already with that.
Yeah.
So with these acts now, working in education for a number of years, I can't say to you off the top of my head that I know every single policy within my settings off by heart, but the gist of them are the same. Wherever you go, you've got the same sort of rules and regulations and the procedures that you'll follow. So it's not where you have to sit down and revise them and memorize them. As long as you've got a gist of what it is and you know where to go and check your information off.
Yeah.
So on to 2.1. We've got to reflect on how the promotion of equality and diversity can protect learners from risk of harm. So in any learning environment, you can have an issue because there's so many people from, there's a diverse range of students and learners that you'll come across. And sometimes what is funny to one person will not be funny to another. Now, you know, what is appropriate for someone will not be appropriate to another. Now, I used to have this very good friendship with a friend of mine who is Catholic and Muslim. And she'd come up and she'd give me pictures of Jesus and she'd give me, you know, but we were a very good friendship where we'd think it was funny. She gave me all these little things that I'd put on my fireplace and we'd visit each other's houses. But we were talking about it once when we were studying together. This was a good 20-odd years ago, probably, and one of the tutors got hold of it and said, "Why are you doing that? It's racist. That's inappropriate. You can't." And I'm like, "I don't have an issue with that. We're just having a laugh and a joke." So what wasn't inappropriate for the two of us? We were having a bit of a fun and, you know, laugh with each other. Was inappropriate to another person. So sometimes these things can come up. So they can be. And then there can be really inappropriate things like when somebody's being racist or sexist, or they're doing offensive comments, or they're making comments about someone's weight or height or colour. It's not done. So if this isn't immediately addressed, it can occur in bullying. Now, when we think of bullying, it's not just a primary school or a high school thing. Bullying can happen in the workplace as well. So unfortunately, it is rife. It can happen. So if this happens, especially to a younger student, one that is probably still school-aged, it'll probably help, you know, impact their social skills. You know, they'll have a poor knowledge of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable within the workplace. So when these things are actually addressed by a member of staff, when they see it immediately, then it puts standards into place for that student, knowing, yeah, this is acceptable. You can speak to me like this, but you cannot speak to me like this. So it really does help with their social skills. So to promote this, it can be done in a lot of different ways. You can follow your current code of practice, and then every setting should have a code of practice as well. The code of practice normally just follows your equality and diversity policies. Now, in accordance with the Equality Act of 2010, it says that any schools, and I will replace that with educational settings, cannot unlawfully discriminate against learners due to the sex, race, disability, religion, beliefs, or sexual orientation. So now we've looked at this briefly. Can you both think of any examples of how this is promoted in your setting?
I'm actually looking at pursuing a complaint against a member of staff. So although I might be leaving, I've been receiving discriminatory behaviour from a colleague of mine now for the last 2.5 years.
That's not acceptable.
It's not acceptable. Definitely not. It's one of the reasons why I'm looking at moving on. So this person is support staff. We have a very small team of 5 people, and from the moment I started at the training centre, she just took a personal dislike to me. So treating me unfavourably compared to other people. Yeah. Initially, I dealt with it by just speaking to my manager, and we had an informal meeting. Where no minutes were taken. It was just an informal meeting, and this person was quite aggressive and negative in the meeting. And
it wasn't escalated after that, even though they had that attitude.
So after that, it did did stop things for a couple of months, and then it just started again. So I spoke to my boss about it again, and I said, "Listen, I'm actually going to take this to HR now." I said, "Because I've read the equality and I've read the equality and diversity policy, and it actually says so. Apart from all the different things like sex and race and sexual orientation, it does actually say in our policy at work, if somebody treats you differently compared to the other people, then you've got a right to complain." So obviously then COVID hit and this person has been working from home. So I've had a gorgeous 15 months of not having to deal with this person.
A blessing in disguise.
Yeah. Where it does manifest is she doesn't answer emails that I need her to answer to allow me to do my job. And because my boss has spoken to her about the way she was treating me, her way of doing things now is to completely ignore me. So 4 weeks ago we were in a meeting, 5 of us, and she spent the whole time she wouldn't even look at me. She sat in a position so she didn't have to look at me. She had her hand up against her face, and every time I spoke, she just ignored me completely. And it's got to the point now where it's making other people in the team uncomfortable. So again, I looked up the policy again and made sure that she was in breach of that policy. Spoke to my manager again and said, "Listen, we're coming back in. Everybody's coming back from working from home shortly." I said, "And I want to nip this in the bud because," I said, "this person doesn't need to like me, but they do need to allow me to do my job. And the way she's behaving is stopping me from doing my job by not answering emails and not answering my calls." So he said, "We'll have another meeting before we come back." And I said, "Yeah, but this time I want minutes to be taken and I want to bring an independent representative." So obviously I'm maybe leaving now. So what I'm actually going to do this week is actually put a complaint into HR and say that part of the reason that I'm leaving is because of this person's behaviour, and actually still pursue it because it's, I just feel apparently she did it to the person before me, has done it on a number of occasions, and my manager is not the strongest person in the world, so he's allowed her to. He called her into a meeting about it just before we had a meeting, like a team meeting, about 8 weeks ago, and he brought her in for a meeting beforehand to say that it had to stop, and she actually walked off the centre. She walked out of the meeting, she left the workplace and didn't come back. And where I'm frustrated is that should have been a disciplinary. She just walked out.
I'm really surprised that judging on her steps and how she's behaving, that in a lot of places I worked would have been, you're getting a disciplinary for that. You're going to be put onto a, you have to be mentored. Someone's going to keep an eye on you, and all of those. But I'm so surprised at the things she's being allowed to get away with. It's not acceptable.
When I spoke to my manager on Wednesday after I'd been offered the other job, and he said, "You're the best clinical trainer I've ever had," and I said, "Well, you are aware that one of the reasons why I'm leaving." And he just said, he basically said, "Yeah, it's terrible. She's terrible the way she behaves. I tried to speak to her last week and she stopped talking."
Fix that.
He turned around and said she stopped talking to me for 2 hours. And I said, "I'm sorry." I said, "But you are my manager." I said, "And if she's now doing that to you," I said, "really, does it not need to be dealt with?" So he seems reluctant to do it because she's the administrative support. So it's his memory. Sometimes he forgets a lot of stuff, and she picks all that up. So, but I just thought, no, I'm not. Even if I do leave, I'm going to make sure that this has been noted because I don't want the next person that comes in to experience the same behaviour.
So the gist of that is, if you're useful to me, I'll ignore everything you do. Is what he's doing at the moment. So he wants to make his life easy. He's got someone to fall back on, or someone will pick up some of his work. It's not, like I said before, it is not acceptable to have like that. And I think it is the best what you're doing, putting a complaint and you're taking yourself out of a toxic situation. You've tried. Yeah,
so Trisha said, I go into my classroom and I've got, my class in front of me and I'm really quite cheerful and upbeat, and then I have to walk past this lady. She literally growls at me sometimes. I can go up to her and ask a question with a pile of paperwork in my hand and she will just behave like I'm not there. She will completely blank me.
Wow.
So it's ridiculous. It's very childish.
That is one of the worst behaviours I've seen. I've seen things that can happen in a work environment, especially when you're in a high stress job, like when you're working with students, and it can be really stressful. But to have someone literally just know you to your face. Now, do you know what? If I was your manager, I would have dealt with it in a completely different way.
I must say I'm totally shocked because Natasha, you've really taken on a lot. Because I don't think if I were to be found in this kind of situation, I'll be smiling to the bank. Because the fact that the manager is encouraging this by not doing anything about it, because you report it over and over, and he's just carrying on like nothing's happened. Because in my former place of work, I've had like a friend who's working, and he was being racially abused and all that, and he got £450,000 because he took it really far. And if he's behaving that way, all the people are uncomfortable, because I can't remember the last time I saw people like making that kind of faces or closing their face while you're talking. And I think that used to be in the Stone Ages, because I'm really shocked that someone will go to that length and still get away with it, no matter who you are. I don't think the Prime Minister do that.
Yeah, it's shocking, but I think as well our chief executive is quite a stern man, and I think my training manager is scared of him, and he doesn't want the chief exec to know there's any problems in the training department. But apparently her behaviour has been like this for years, and I've only been in the organisation 3 years, but apparently her behaviour has been like this for a long time, and nobody has ever challenged it. And he just doesn't want to ruffle feathers. He doesn't want anybody else to know.
This for 3 years. That's ridiculous. 3 years of the same ongoing issue escalating and going on and on. I'm sorry you've had to do that, because it's not.
You're really a strong person, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, the other girls in the team are embarrassed, because they just say, you know, why does she treat you like that? And they see it in meetings and things. Like I say, last week we had a meeting talking about coming back to the workplace. And after the meeting, one of my colleagues just said, oh my God, that her behaviour was just shocking in that meeting. Now, the fact that she, as a junior trainer, is coming back and telling me this, and my manager is actually in the same meeting and not picking up on it. So, yeah, that's how I'm going to deal with it, because there is one paragraph in our equality and diversity policy. I was looking at it for this session as well. But it basically says if somebody treats you differently, it doesn't say for a reason. And examples it gives is excluding you from conversations, not providing you with what you need for your workplace and things like that. And she meets all 4 of that section. So that's what I'm going to highlight in my complaint to HR.
To be honest, I think your manager needs to have some disciplinary action as well. And
and I think the manager needs to be put in order, because he's encouraged, because he reported over and over. And when we're talking about treating someone differently, or maybe discrimination, they do it in a very subtle way, maybe in terms of promotion or whatever. I don't see people coming really upfront this way, to be honest with you, because I don't think, even no matter what the organization is trying to cover up, they should have dealt with it.
I mean, I don't want to go into too much personal detail, but somebody has said to me that these two had actually had a relationship in the past. They're both married, and somebody's told me they were having a relationship outside of work. So I think there's a little bit of that going on as well. But that has nothing to do with me, and it'll have nothing to do with my complaint. But I think that might be the root of it.
Might be, It's basically like when you tell a child that, no, you can't do this, and then they do it, and you're like, oh, it's okay, don't do it again, and they do it again, and you say, oh, just don't do it again, when you're not giving them some reinforcement.
She was a cleaner originally, and she's worked herself up from working in the laundry department to being a cleaner, to working in training, to now being
well for herself as well. There shouldn't be any aspect of jealousy, which I think is derived from that.
Exactly. The first meeting she had, she said, well, you just walked in here thinking because you're a nurse, you know everything. So I said, it was really poisonous what she was saying, and my boss just sat there and listened, didn't say anything. And I just said, I'm really sorry. I said, but everybody knows me because I talk to the cleaners the same way they talk to the doctors and the consultants. I said, even if you don't like me, you have to be professional and allow me to do my job. So I don't need you to be my best friend, but you need to allow me to do my job, But it's very close.
That's all it's telling us. They don't have to like me, but we just have to be civil and do our work. So,
absolutely.
Don't have to go and hang out and be best friends.
No, we're not here to make friends. We're here to work.
Exactly.
Yeah, but she isn't able to do that, unfortunately, so this is why I'm pursuing it. So I just want to protect the next person that comes along, because apparently the person before me, she did the exact same, and I may stay there 1 day a week, and then I will just sort of be in and out in 1 day. So, but I just feel like for the protection of other people in the future, I'm going to do it.
It's to be done.
Yeah.
Oh, that's terrible.
That's an example.
So, how could we protect learners and staff as well from risk of harm? So, again, like what you've done, fantastic. You referred to your policies and procedures. You looked at it. You know exactly where you stand. You know exactly what should and shouldn't be done. So, within this, you have things in place. So, you've got policies and procedures. You've got, other bits where to help, promote equality and diversity. Even just if there's a celebration that's coming up. I remember when I was in a primary school that's quite close to me. I used to work there, and we actually celebrated Albanian Day, where we came in dressed in the Albanian flag colours. Some students brought food in. We brought in, researched what sort of different things. And there were only 2 or 3 students within the school that were actually Albanian. But it was nice that the whole school got involved with their special day. So it's good to value differences between the staff and the learners. You could have prayer rooms, correspondence in different languages. I'm a firm believer of this, because I've worked with a lot of parents in my primary days, and a lot of them may not have the same English reading skills as some other parents. So it's nice that you can have something translated in their own languages. Staff as translators as well. That's a really good thing that we've got diverse culture now, community where you can translate. And dress code. So if you're going to be in a position where you're going to be going in and teaching someone, obviously you don't want to rock up in a mini skirt and a halter top, or because in our positions where we are, we're constantly bending over and sitting next to students or leaning over them. So you don't want to be in a position where you're exposing yourself. So dress code is very important. And then how can we protect our learners from risk of harm? So we've got to make sure that we establish a safe and inclusive environment. Make sure your health and safety policies are followed. Now, actually, I'm going to ask you, what sort of health and safety procedures do you have within your own workplace? I mean, do you want to answer this one? What sort of health and safety measures you got? Even if you're not physically in a classroom environment, what do you do?
Okay, the health and safety we have is like when you get into the class, though there's a policy for health and safety, which I can't really go into detail because it's quite detailed. Yeah. But you're ensuring that the students are properly spaced out and the environment is ventilated, which you make sure that maybe the chairs are in order and they're not sitting in a certain way that maybe when people come in, they're sitting next to each other in a way that there's no form of discrimination or whatsoever. And you try to gauge and know what's happening and when you're coming like group activities and see how they behave towards each other. So yeah, that's for the class. I'm making sure we have they are aware of the fire exit, or maybe if there's a drill on that day, maybe a fire alarm or something, you make them aware and say in case if like those of there's no drill today, but if it does, that's the muster point. So we ensure that at the start before we start the class, and that way we tell them what the toilets are and everything. Yeah.
I like that table one, because even when I was as an adult going and studying, we'd have our tutors constantly mixing up, because we'd be like, oh, I want to sit in my friend group. But it does, and I hear my children complaining now, oh, I've got to sit next to this person now, or we've got to do this. But it really does force you to work with other people, so it is a good one.
Yeah.
So we've got some examples of, say, if you're in a traditional school type of setting or a college setting, or even a sixth form. So you've got, if you've got lots of stairs within your building, you do a one-way system on the stairs. So one way to go up, one way to go down, even if they're in the same stairwell. You get locked gates, and main internal hallway doors are locked, so that, especially for younger learners, this is important. So you'll notice if you have young children, within your school, certain doors they can and cannot open. authorized access to certain people only, so you've got access cards and fobs, and even with those access cards, certain members of staff will have access to everything, say external doors, and some will only have them to internal doors, so it depends on what you need. You can have things like first aiders, first aid kit, accident report books. Make sure your cleaning equipment is locked away because you don't want anyone, regardless of their age, getting hold of bleach or, you know, or anything that can cause them harm. Make sure you've got accessible learning environments. And Natasha said something last week. Was it about the young child that broke her leg and she had to sit in the hallway for 2 weeks in the dining hall?
That's right. She was left down in the dining hall on the ground floor, away from the classroom.
And it wasn't fair to her, was it? Because she couldn't see her friends for those 2 weeks. She couldn't access every single thing she needed. And so you do need to make sure you get accessible learning environments, or adjust or adapt to try and include everyone in.
Absolutely.
And again, the final one, risk assessments. So carry out risk assessments, see what could cause harm. If you know that there's 2 students that really do not get along and should not be placed together, that is, and again, it's a form of a risk assessment. You know you're going to keep them separate. So there are, and then things like make sure your bags aren't out in the walkways, or someone's not. A favourite one of mine, when kids were doing, they just swing their chairs, you know, and I'd be like, all 6 legs on the floor, and then say, what do you mean 6 legs? 4 of the chair, 2 of yours. They better touch the floor. So that's 2.1, and I've got a couple of tips for you. Now, if you've already done Unit 1, and I know some of you have and some of you haven't, this can be cross-referred to Unit 1. So it can be cross-referred to Learning Outcome 4, AC 4.2 and 4.3. It's where you actually talk, in that little section, you actually talk about how you're going to promote equality and diversity, and what sort of steps you take to make sure that students not being put, you know. And then, if you
can we just go back? You mentioned there Learning Outcome 4.2 and 4.3. Is that from last week's session? Because we only got up to...
No, it's not from last week. This is, some of these units can actually be cross-referred to other work within different units.
That's right. I'm just not understanding which one, though.
Unit 1. Unit 1. So it can be cross-referred to Unit 1 if you've done it. If you've not done Unit 1 yet, don't worry about that, because it's a nice one to answer. It's not something that needs reams and reams of writing. So if you have done Unit 1, you can cross-refer it and say, just start off with, this unit, this AC 2.1 is cross-referred to Unit 1, and then you just put down what I've written here. Oh, that's okay. Cool. Little thing. If that's not been done, if you've not done that, all I want you to do is talk about how you promote equality and diversity. Talk about your policies and procedures that are in place. Say how you access your equality and diversity policy, your safeguarding, health and safety, prevent, any of those that are applicable to you.
Sure.
And then include an example, but it needs to be detailed.
Okay.
So a nice detailed example. So I remember what I would do is, I remember going on a canoeing trip with Year 5. And within that trip, I would talk about the pre-trip, how some members of staff went out to do a risk assessment of the centre first. Then I would talk about how we did a safety lesson with the students and the instructors for a good 20 minutes. And then we talked about how the actual trip went. Then I remember having students that had asthma, and I had access to their inhalers. So we had 2 students with asthma, so we had 1 student per member of staff within the canoes, and we sat with them. And so we just talked about how we managed risks and how we managed, you know, protected the students from harm, from if they fell in the water, what could be done, and so on. So go in detail about what you did, and then do an overall judgment and say, I believe this was beneficial or not, and just recap it how you think it went.
Okay.
So let's go on to 2.2. This is a shorter one, so it shouldn't take that long for this. So explain actions that can be taken to value individual learners. So when we want to value individual learners, what can we actually do? Now, I'm a firm believer of this. Now, regardless of how old or how young you are, I've worked with children that are 3 in nursery, and then I've worked with their parents. I've worked with adult learners who are the same age as me. Some are older than me, some might be younger than me. In essence, respect. You need to treat all of your students and your staff members with respect. You know, saying a kind word, smiling at them, or if there's nothing that you've got that's positive to say, just keep it quiet. It won't kill you to treat someone with respect, but it will actually be beneficial to you because you're modeling good behavior for your students, and also they know you've set a standard of how you want to speak to them and how they will speak to you. So if you're telling them to shut up or be quiet or go away or any of that, then they're going to probably do the same with you. But if you're saying, okay, sweetheart, let's listen, what's going on, give them a chance to talk. Give them the opportunity to be heard. And it really does go a long way. Then make sure you learn your students' names and pronounce it correctly. I remember there was a young student when I first started, I joined a new school. And everybody kept on calling the student MJ, and I won't say his real name. They kept on calling it MJ, so I think the kids had just decided to have a bit of a fun. They knew I was new. They didn't know that I didn't know his. I thought, okay, I know what his name is, but everyone called him that. So for the first week or so, all I did was call him MJ until he got so annoyed and said, Miss, that's not my name. This is my name. And I wish I'd actually asked him to start off with and said, is this what you would like me to call you, or would you like me to say, you know? So it's important, learn their names and then pronounce it correctly as well.
Yeah, I had a member of staff last week on induction. She was from Nigeria, and she had we put little cards up on the desk so people can write their name.
Yeah.
And her name was so long, so I just said to her at the very beginning of the class, we went round, and I said, could you tell me how to pronounce your name, because I want to make sure that I get it right. So she told me, but it was such a long name. But I said, I said to her, is that correct? And she said, yeah, that's great. And I said, great, you know. And she said, you're one of the first people that have actually asked how to pronounce my name. She said, usually people will either get it wrong and just call me that all day, or she said they ask if they can shorten my name, because the first 3 letters was OKE, and she said a lot of people will just call me OK. And she said, and I really don't like that. And I said, yeah, you've got a beautiful name, so let's make sure we pronounce it right.
Yeah, sure,
it is important, yeah, because it does make your student feel like, oh, you're actually paying attention to me. You're taking, even it probably took you a couple of seconds to clarify it, but she felt happy and important, didn't she?
Yeah, because I just think I would never, just because somebody's got, I mean, to me, if I had shortened her name, that would have been making her different. It's almost like saying, well, your name's too long and I can't be bothered pronouncing it, so I'm going to abbreviate it. And I wouldn't do that to anybody else. So, no, I thought it was really important just to make sure that, you know, it was said the way she wanted it to be said.
No, it is good. Well done.
She did actually thank me for it at the end. Yeah, she said, I really appreciated you doing that. She said, because I think other people in the class were probably struggling with my name as well. Sometimes just people won't talk to me because they find it difficult to say my name, so they just rather not get into conversation with me.
Exactly.
So,
okay, that's why I really make sure of that before I start. I'll ask you, how do you pronounce your name? Because I come to realize that people's names are very important to them. So in as much as you try to shorten it or you call it the English way, pronounce it the English way, they just go with it, but deep down, they like you to pronounce it properly. And once they do, because I'm good at remembering names anyway, so I never forget it. And when you say their name, you see the smile on their face. They like feel really wanted and important because they think you're making the effort to get to know them. Yeah, so it's really important that we.
Then it's these small steps that you take that really do make a difference. Because when you think about, oh, how can we value our learners, you don't really think, oh, you think it's one of those that isn't even worth mentioning, but it is. Their name is so important, and taking that a couple of seconds, a couple of minutes, just to make sure you're saying a person's name correctly, because you're going to be referring to them so often in for the next 6-7 months if you're in a long-term course. Then, you know, it is. Another point is to make sure that you actually listen to their views and take into account their opinions. Now, when we communicate, a lot of issues, especially with you, Natasha, you'll know this because of person-centered care. A lot of people within communication think, oh, that's just me talking and talking and talking. But it's not. 50% is you conversing with others, but 50% is you being quiet and listening. So make sure they actually listen to what they're saying. And if they're struggling, you know, don't be quick to jump in. Give them some time. Like sometimes you'll ask a question and I'll say, oh, okay, I'm going to give me an example, or Natasha, give me an example. And then if you're taking like 2 seconds, I'm like, oh, come on. You know, I've got to give you time to actually think of something and formulate, you know, response, don't you? So it's important that you just let them, just don't make it awkward, but just give them a bit of time. Come on, next slide. There you go. Again, follow the equality and diversity policy, I think. So make sure that you're familiar with it, which you both are. Pay attention to your students. So when you pay attention, you'll know if they're feeling unwell, especially if you're seeing them, say, over a course of, like with my students now, I normally have, when I was face-to-face teaching, I would have a cohort for a year. So 9 months, I would get used to those students. I would know exactly what each person is. I pay a lot of attention to my students. I think it really makes a difference. So you'll know when they're feeling good, when they're feeling off, or what the matter is. You can identify even if they're feeling ill as well. Make sure you're approachable so that, you know, that they know they can come to you and say, I've got this problem, or I need you to help me on this. And again, if you've got one-to-one learners or in a learning situation in a class and you see somebody struggling a little bit, having a extra one-to-one session or a 10-minute session where 10 minutes of time just set aside just to go and speak to them, just to clarify. I used to have students that would sit there and listen to what I was talking about in the class, but I knew that I'd have to physically go to that person later on as well and just work through first, or if we were doing maths, for example, work through 1 or 2 questions together. That gave the student time to get their head around what was going on, and then they were okay to independently carry on. So sometimes you have to make concessions.
Yeah. I mean, we have staff from 17 up to 65, so quite a wide range. And it's much easier now because of COVID. We only have 6 in a class, but when I had up to 22 in the class, it would always be the quiet ones, or you know, people. I'm working with adults, so you know they all have their own responsibilities at home, children, broken down cars, you know, dramas, and you will always have the quiet people in the class. So I kind of make it a point of sort of by coffee break, by 10 o'clock, I try to suss all about. In the first hour and a half, I try to suss the learners out, and the ones that are very quiet or don't feel comfortable talking in a large group, I can speak to them then at coffee break and just sort of, you know, see if there's any extra support. Like you said, doing extra one-to-one sessions, or if they're struggling, is getting extra information and printing it off, or making sure it's accessible information, or if I've got a DVD, if they're struggling with the reading and writing aspect, I can say, oh, you know, I've got a demonstration DVD on this, I can give to you. You can just take it home and watch it at home, and if you've got any questions, then come back and ask me. So looking at different learning styles and offering extra resources if I've got them, you know, to make sure they're understanding what we're covering.
So with your students, do you have them like on, what's the length of your sessions with them? Is it one time, or do you have them recurring?
So most of my sessions are anything from 2 hours up to half a day. But when every year our care staff come in for 3 days refresher training, and I have them for a full day of that. So we're covering 3 different topics, but I have them for the whole day. So
you get a decent amount of time with them.
Yeah, no, I also do assessments on the houses, so I see them in the workplace as well as training, so I see how they are out at work. And, you know, sometimes, you know, in a group of 20, you might have some quite loud and gregarious staff, and then you've got your really quiet ones. And it's about measuring that in the class and making sure that, when we're asking for examples, it's not just the ones that are comfortable to shout out all the time that answer the questions. I'll say, okay, that's great, thank you for your feedback, can I get another point of view? And then maybe if I see somebody that's been a bit quiet, I'll say, do you feel comfortable to give an example? And then if they are able to give me an example, then I'll really sort of thank them for that and just say, well, that's a valuable point of view, and just trying to draw people out of themselves a little bit, which, like I say, now we're down to 6 in the class. We thought our classes would become a lot shorter because it's smaller classes, but they're running to exactly the same time, because I think now, when there was 22 in the class, people wouldn't feel comfortable to talk, whereas now in the smaller group, they're much more chatty and using a lot more examples from the workplace. So the sessions are about the same.
Yeah, I've seen the same thing as well. Now, I teach healthcare as well, and I teach education here. So there's 2 different things I do. My education classes are a lot smaller. They have between 2 to 3 students in them. Sometimes there's 1-to-1. And as you've seen, we've got a few members, learners that are on, but not everybody's got the same availability. So with these type of lessons where there's less students, sometimes these lessons will be a lot longer. It'll probably take me an hour or even longer to go through them, because we do have a very rich conversation. But in some of my healthcare courses where I've got, say, 10 to 12 students, sometimes 6 or 7 will turn up on a slow day. But even then, it's because when you do ask for, oh, are you okay? Would you like to add anything? And nobody will talk, because they all think, oh, he's not talking, she's not talking, why should I? So yeah, it can. 100% what you're saying is true. So like that, again, a student that actually feels heard, feels valued, they actually will flourish in a learning environment. When I go to learn, and I still do a lot of students, when I know that I've got a responsive tutor or I've got processes in place where I can get answers from, I work better. But if I'm thinking, oh, I've got to do all of this all by myself, I find it a lot harder. So I've got some tips for this section. So here you should refer to your equality and diversity policy. And I know Zakira last week said that, and it might be the same situation with other workplaces, that you're not allowed to share your policies. If you've got that issue, just go on the internet and find an equality and diversity policy that's similar to your setting. So just within that, I don't want you to copy and paste the whole thing in. Just copy the sections that are applicable to this. How do you value your learners? You might even want to put an excerpt of your code of conduct in. So refer to equality and diversity policy, pop in a bit of your code of conduct if that's applicable. And then again, you'll notice that this is very example heavy. This course itself, you will notice that almost on all of these questions that you'll answer, you'll be adding some type of example in. So use an example of a time you supported your learner, you identified the learning needs or their gaps, and you addressed this issue. You might have set up a one-to-one session, or Natasha, like you, make sure you familiarize yourself with students during break, give them extra resources, things that you might do when you identify a student's work is not quite up to scratch, that it needs a bit more work. How do you give them feedback? What do you do? So use an example of a time you've supported your learners, either through feedback or physically setting up an extra session for them, or whatever you've done.
Yeah.
Great. And then on to the last question, which is 2.3. So explain good practice in providing individual learners with information. So how do you actually give learners information? So before you actually give them information, you need to know what the learning needs are. You'll probably have had initial assessments taking place where you know what sort of learning style they study at. When the 2 of you joined, you would have filled in initial assessments as well, so that we could identify what type of learner you are, and we can work in that type of style for you. So no 2 learners are the same. Every learner has a different ability. I will learn different from you, Natasha. Aminu will learn different from both of you. So we might have some similarities. We'll have different skills, we'll have different abilities, and again, lifestyles play a very big factor into it. So depending on if you've got young children, or if you've got a full-time job, or if you've got more free time, it really depends on what your own support and your lifestyle you have. So when you do this initial and diagnostic assessment, so within these, sometimes these assessments don't have to be formal. Sometimes you'll just question someone and ask them, how are you going on? You'll identify how they learn just by talking to them as well. And it can help you identify gaps. Now, there are lots of different assessments that learners can take place in. And now some of these ones that I've got on here, they can be for younger learners, but I've seen them used in adult education as well. And the things that when I was doing face-to-face teaching, it's what I love using this. Now, the KWL chart. So what do I know? What do I want to know? And then what have I learned? Now, if I was in a lesson with you physically, I would first at the beginning of this lesson, I would have said, okay, let's fill in one of these. And probably we can do this online as well. I would have said, right, we're doing quality and diversity. In this little section here, tell me, what do you know? And then you would put down a few points of what you actually know onto here. And then I would say, okay, so you know this section. Can you fill in the middle section now? What do you want to know? Then you'd put down some questions. Then we'd get on with the lesson, we'd teach it. And at the end of it, I would say, okay, can you tell me what have you learned? Then you'd put down this. And then I would say, have these answered your questions here? And you would say yes or no. And if they didn't, then we'd have another section where I would just write it on a whiteboard, or we'd go over what your questions are there, and we'd make sure that what you wanted to learn, you've learned them. And there's two benefits for this. First, you get to find out what your students actually know to start off with. So I would say, okay, everybody fill out your what do you want to know section. You do it, and then I'd say, okay, tell me what do you know, and then I can assess you and see, oh, okay, this is good, or no, I need to go into a lot more detail in this section. Then I could say, oh, okay, what sort of questions do you have? And then you've learned it. Your excuse, no problem. Bless you is what I meant to say. Couldn't even stop that then. It's okay. So, this KWL chart is quite good for any age learner, I think. And I like using it.
I've not seen that before, but I do like it because I can use that in my class as well,
It's great for feedback as well, because at the end of it, when you have a little chat with your students, you can say, oh, how did you feel about today's lesson? What do you think we can improve on? So I always like adding that into it as well in a formal classroom situation, because it really lets you know about what your teaching style is and if you're actually identifying their gaps or not. So just when you get a chance, just type. I think we actually have one of these on, we do 100% have one of these. I think it's on Unit 1 or Unit 2. We've got a chart which we ask you to fill in, but when you get into that, but just type in KWL chart and it comes up with so many different ones. The little fancy ones, colourful ones, are just plain and simple.
This is my first time I've seen this, but man, I think this is really amazing.
It's quite,
I'm just gonna
quite basic. It's very, very basic, but it's a great assessment tool.
I think some of the more complicated ones, they become difficult in themselves. I mean, we did the ones at the beginning of this course, like you said. There are some really, really complicated ones that I've seen, but that is, like I say, that's a really accessible and easy to use little tool that you can have in the class. So I would even sort of put that in the classroom at the beginning of the class and get them to fill out the first part, and then at coffee break I could look at them. The first two parts, and then obviously, like you say, for your feedback at the end, if there's bits that people still don't understand, then you know who you have to go back to and offer a little bit of one-to-one to.
And it helps, especially when you've got a quiet group and they're all filling in their separate forms. It helps to develop interaction with them as well. So if they're all saying, oh, I know this, another one will be like, oh yeah, I knew that too. So it does give them a bit of a talking point.
Yeah.
Right.
Then we've got self-marking. Now, for example, you're in a classroom environment, you've got your students to do answer a couple of questions. So instead of you physically going around and saying, oh, okay, right, let me mark everyone, to save time, you'll spend 5 minutes rather than 25 minutes trying to mark so many students. But you say, right, here are the answers, and get a different coloured pen. And then you say, first answer was this, how did you do? Or you ask someone, give me your answer, what did you get? And if they're not quite, I say, oh, okay, almost. Then you ask the next person, So they can do self-marking. This helps them to identify what their own strengths are and what they need to improve on. And then you can also do peer marking, where you can get, say if they've got two or more people sitting on a table, get them to swap their books around, and then they can mark each other's work. Now, what I like on this little section doing is, I like them to add, if I was to mark your work, Amadou, and you were to mark mine, and Natasha could ask us to do that, and then she could say, okay, write down one positive thing about the work, and then write down one improvement in a nice way. So you'd have constructive feedback. You're focusing on what was positive. So for some of my younger learners used to say, I really like your handwriting. It's so nice. You know, that simple sentence like that makes someone happy. And then another would say that, but I feel like you need to add more detail into this section, or you should have put more bullet points in or something. So it just gives you that constructive feedback and a nice positive remark.
Yeah.
So again, it just provides learners with what type of information they need to just try and improve. So then we've got good practice as well in trying to give individual learners their information. So you've got to speak to your learners about what their own expectations are. So sometimes you can have, this would really work if you're going to be doing long-term courses. If you're only seeing someone for a day or a couple of days, you probably won't apply that much.
Yeah.
Can identify and highlight what they need to work on. So if they're, like, for example, this course here, what I'm hoping to implement as I carry on with this is just a quick catch-up session over the phone, where I can see where you're up to, what you're doing, what you need help with, is there anything I can assist you with. So I'm hoping to do something like that on here. So, you know, if you've got any appendices that are missing, or if you've got, you know, bits and bobs that need to be added onto it, then we can work through it. Figure out what your own expectations are. So your students need to know what your expectations are as well of the teacher. So that I expect you to do this, this, and this, and make sure you're doing it on the date that it's meant to be done. And then again, it helps you to adjust any learning programs accordingly, depending on what your learner needs. So for this, we've got tips. So this again, if you have done Unit 1, it can be cross-referred to Learning Outcome 2 in Unit 1, 2.1 and 2.3. If you've not done Unit 1, it's fine. That's not a problem. All you've got to do is explain what practices you use personally and how you encourage your students to reach their potential. So how you'd address any areas of development or any of those. So put a paragraph in, just saying what sort of practices you use. And then you can even do this as an example. So there was put an example of a time that you actually did this. And then tell me, how do you pass the information to the learner? Do you do it through feedback, verbal or written? Do you have tutorials? Do you have self-assessments? Do you have quarterly meetings for longer students? So what do you actually do to feedback to them?
Yeah.
Face-to-face, there's slightly different procedures. Now, when I'm doing feedback, because we do blended learning, so for me, for you, when you send your work to me, I'll give you feedback. I'll give you a front cover form, which I showed you, Amadou, I think, on induction day.
Mm.
And it's just where I'll put down my comments and I'll say, right, this is good, this is great, this bit needs a little bit more work, and I'll tell you what he's doing. Then I'll even email you, and I'll even pick up the phone when I know you guys are free, and I'll just give you a phone call, or I'll email and say, could you let me know when you're available? I'd like to have a quick chat. So that's how I've adapted it to for online learning. But for classroom learning, you can actually just pull someone aside, or go into a meeting with them and say, we're going to have a tutorial, pastoral care at the moment, and just go through each of your learners in that way as well. So there's many ways you can do it. So today we've looked at how we promote equality and diversity and how we can protect our learners from harm. We looked at what actions can be taken to value our learners, and then we looked at good practices in giving our learners information.